I'm Amy Goodman. We're spending the show airing excerpts of the Donald Trump-Hillary Clinton presidential debate at Washington University in St. Louis and giving Green Party presidential candidate Jill Stein a chance to respond to the same questions posed to the major party candidates. We invited, as well as Dr. Stein, Libertarian presidential candidate Gary Johnson, but he did not take us up on this invitation. We turn now back to the debate. This is debate moderator Martha Raddatz of ABC.
Mr. Trump, in December, you said this: Donald J. Trump is calling for a total and complete shutdown of Muslims entering the United States until our country's representatives can figure out what the hell is going on. We have no choice. We have no choice. Your running mate said this week that the Muslim ban is no longer your position. Is that correct? And if it is, was it a mistake to have a religious test?
First of all, Captain Khan is an American hero. And if I were president at that time, he would be alive today. Because unlike her, who voted for the war without knowing what she was doing, I would not have had our people in Iraq. Iraq was a disaster. So he would have been alive today. The Muslim ban is something that in some form has morphed into a extreme vetting from certain areas of the world. Hillary Clinton wants to allow
And why did it morph into that? Answer the question.
Why don't you
still believe
her? You
I do.
Me all the time. Why don't you interrupt her?
Would you please explain whether or not the Muslim ban still stands?
It's called extreme vetting. We are going to areas like Syria where they're coming in by the tens of thousands because of Barack Obama, and Hillary Clinton wants to allow a 550% increase over Obama. People are coming into our country like we have no idea who they are, where they're from, what their feelings about our country is, and she wants 550% more. This is going to be the great Trojan horse of all time. We have enough problems in this country. I believe in building safe zones. I believe in having other people pay for them. As an example, the Gulf states who are not carrying their weight, but they have nothing but money, and take care of people. But I don't want to have, with all the problems this country has and all of the problems that you see going on, hundreds of thousands of people coming in from Syria when we know nothing about them. We know nothing about their values, and we know nothing about their love for our country.
And Secretary Clinton, let me ask you about that, because you have asked for an increase from 10 to 65,000 Syrian refugees. We know you want tougher vetting. That's not a perfect system. So why take the risk of having those refugees come into the country?
Well, first of all, I will not let anyone into our country that I think poses a risk to us. But there are a lot of refugees, women and children. Think of that picture we all saw of that 4-year-old boy with the blood on his forehead because he'd been bombed by the Russian and Syrian air forces. There are children suffering in this catastrophic war, largely, I believe, because of Russian aggression, and we need to do our part. We by no means are carrying anywhere near the load that Europe and others are. But we will have vetting that is as tough as it needs to be from our professionals, our intelligence experts, and others. But it is important for us as a policy, not to say, as Donald has said, we're going to ban people based on a religion. How do you do that? We are a country founded on religious freedom and liberty. How do we do what he has advocated without causing great distress within our own country? Are we going to have religious tests when people fly into our country? And how do we expect to be able to implement those? So I thought that what he said was extremely unwise and even dangerous. And indeed, you can look at the propaganda on a lot of the terrorist sites, and what Donald Trump says about Muslims is used to recruit fighters because they want to create a war between us. And the final thing I would say, this is the 10th or 12th time that he's denied being for the war in Iraq. We have it on tape. The entire press corps has looked at it. It's been debunked, but it never stops him from saying whatever he wants to say.
Has not been debunked.
So please
Has not been debunked. And
go to HillaryClinton.com and you can see it.
I was against the war in Iraq. Has not been debunked. And you
Jill Stein.
Is a crisis, a global humanitarian crisis. Millions of people are fleeing for their lives from Syria. I think it's something like 500,000 people have actually been killed in Syria. It is a humanitarian catastrophe that we have very much to do with. The power of ISIS in Syria comes directly out of the catastrophe of Iraq, which Hillary Clinton supported and Donald Trump did as well. At least initially, he supported going into Iraq. Hillary Clinton certainly led the charge into Libya and created that catastrophe, which led to the release of huge stockpiles of arms, an incredible violent and catastrophic situation in Libya, all of which helped fan the flames in Syria. So we have certainly a great deal to do with the crisis in Syria, and not to mention that we have been bombing in Syria as well, and apparently funding some of the rebel groups, the very unsavory rebel groups, which appear to be al-Qaeda related. So we have had a major hand in the chaos of Syria, and indeed the major hand instigating the chaos in the Middle East. So being the wealthiest country in the world, it's very important that we do our share in caring for the Syrian refugees. But let me say, it's also really important that we go back to this crisis in Syria and in the Middle East, and instead of continuing to pour gasoline on this fire, we need to take a stand on behalf of a weapons embargo to all parties. Since our weapons are getting into the hands of all parties, we need to impose a freeze on the bank accounts of our allies that are continuing to fund terrorist enterprises, and to work with the Turks, who are our ally, in name at least, to close down their border to the flow of terrorist militias across their border. That is the contribution that we need to make, and we need to reinstigate the ceasefire and begin a peace process in Syria. The language being used by Donald Trump and Hillary Clinton towards Syria is extremely irresponsible and very dangerous, and is bringing us to the brink of conflict with Russia, another nuclear-armed power that could blow up on us very quickly. We need to be very cautious about where this is going.
Let's go back to debate moderator Anderson Cooper of CNN.
Mr. Trump, let me follow up with you. In 2008, you wrote in one of your books that the most important characteristic of a good leader is discipline. You said if a leader doesn't have it, quote, he or she won't be one for very long. In the days after the first debate, you sent out a series of tweets from 3 a.m. to 5 a.m., including one that told people to check out a sex tape. Is that the discipline of a good leader? No,
it wasn't check out a sex tape. It was just take a look at the person that she built up to be this wonderful Girl Scout, who was no Girl Scout. By the way, just so you understand, when she said 3 o'clock in the morning, take a look at Benghazi. She said, who's going to answer the call at 3 o'clock in the morning? Guess what? She didn't answer, because when Ambassador Stevens...
The question is that the discipline of a good leader?
600 times. Well, she said she was awake at 3 o'clock in the morning. And she also sent a tweet out at 3 o'clock in the morning, but I won't even mention that. But she said she'll be awake. Who's the famous thing? We're going to answer our call at 3 o'clock in the morning. Guess what happened? Ambassador Stevens sent 600 requests for help. And the only one she talked to was Sidney Blumenthal, who's her friend, and not a good guy, by the way. So, you know, she shouldn't be talking about that. Now, tweeting happens to be a modern-day form of communication. I mean, you can like it or not like it. I have, between Facebook and Twitter, I have almost 25 million people. It's a very effective way of communication. So you can put it down, but it is a very effective form of communication. I'm not unproud of it, to be honest with you.
Secretary Clinton, does Mr. Trump have the discipline to be a good leader?
No.
Oh, I'm shocked to hear that.
Well, it's not only my opinion, it's the opinion of many others, national security experts, Republicans, former Republican members of Congress. But it's in part because those of us who have had the great privilege of seeing this job up close and know how difficult it is, and it's not just because I watched my husband take a $300 billion deficit and turn it into a $200 billion surplus, and 23 million new jobs were created, and incomes went up for everybody. Everybody. African-American incomes went up 33%. And it's not just because I worked with George W. Bush after 9/11. And I was very proud that when I told him what the city needed, what we needed to recover, he said, "You've got it," and he never wavered. He stuck with me. And I have worked, and I admire President Obama. He inherited the worst financial crisis since the Great Depression. That was a terrible time for our country.
We have to move along.
9 million people lost their jobs, 5 million homes were lost, and $13 trillion in family wealth was wiped out. We are back on the right track. He would send us back into recession with his tax plans.
Secretary Clinton, we are moving to an audience question. We're almost out of time. We have another. Mr. Trump, we're moving to an audience question.
It is, our country has the
Secretary
slowest
Clinton, we want to get to the audience.
Jill Stein, your final comment for this hour. You have 90 seconds.
I just want to finish this discussion about this endless war in the Middle East. And I think it's very important that the American people have the benefit of knowing what we are paying for this war and what we are getting from it. This war, according to a Harvard study a couple of years ago, would cost us about $6 trillion for just Iraq and Afghanistan alone, when you include the ongoing costs of caring for our wounded veterans who deserve far more than what they're getting, not only in health care, housing, PTSD support, job training, et cetera. But it's about $6 trillion, which comes down to about $50,000 for every American household. But what have we achieved with this endless war? Failed states, mass refugee migrations, and worse terrorist threats. They are not getting better, whether you look at the Taliban, who are stronger, have more territory now than they did when we began fighting them some 16 years ago, whether you look at al-Qaeda, which has become a global movement, or ISIS. This doesn't work, yet it's costing us half of our discretionary budget and almost half of your income taxes. So it's very important that we have a new offensive in the Middle East. We call it a peace offensive, and it begins with a weapons embargo and with a freeze on the bank accounts of our allies like Saudi Arabia if they continue to insist on funding terrorist enterprises around the world. That is the way forward.
Green Party presidential candidate Dr. Jill Stein, as part of our Expanding the Debate 2-hour special. We will do another hour of this debate. You can go to democracynow.org. Democracy Now! Is produced by Mike Burke, Nermeen Sheikh, Carla Wills, Laura Gottesdiener, Dina Guzder, Sam Malkoff, Robbie Karen, Hani Massoud, Sharina Nadur, and Andre Lewis, Mike DeFilippo, Miguel Noguera, and Paul Huckabee, our engineers. Special thanks to Becca Staley, Julie Crosby, Miriam Barnard, Hugh Grand, David Prude, Ariel Boone. I'm Amy Goodman. Our website is democracynow.org to see our 3.5-hour presidential debate special and our 2-hour special today. Thanks for joining us.